Hello? Oh wow,
No? Yeah,
it's
yeah.
all off. Oh wow.
Again,
Oh, I still,
we
and I still
didn't,
have
we
the same
didn't,
background. Oops.
we didn't fix it. We didn't fix it.
No, I didn't fix it. Let's see if I go like this. No, then
Oh
you
my
have this
God,
in the
no.
way.
Wow.
Wow, what? I'm trying to fix the camera because um
The last time.
otherwise it cuts off my head
Mm.
when I upload the video, but I don't know if this is gonna work, but we can try.
Okay.
Well, I guess we should be more prepared next time. But yeah, well, welcome back to the weekly meeting. Um And David said he was going to be here, but maybe he got caught up in something.
Okay. Well, so we left off on what? We left off on.
Well, last week we spoke about the blown fuses and trip breakers and what you would look for in that case. That is connected to a ground fault, shorted circuit,
Mhm.
and that you would trace the circuit and isolate where there is an unintentional connection between several wires or between a hot wire and a ground wire. And I wanted to take some more time and go over specifically tripped breakers and what they could mean different from um, having a short circuit or a ground fault, because you can have breakers that are tripped where you're going through the system and you don't find any faults, like electrical faults. Um, and that could trace back to several other factors, and that's a little bit what I wanted to go into. So that's all right.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so basically, when you go through the system, when you arrive to a job and you find that there is no power to the unit, for example, and then you go and you isolate your power sources and you find that your disconnect is on, but you're not having power to your disconnect either. The disconnect is the box that's outside the unit. Sometimes you have a separately mounted box that has like a lever, or like you can pull it out or you can turn it. There's different ways how it's done. Sometimes it's just a breaker on the unit that you can flip up and down. But usually you have an electrical panel inside the building that provides the power to the disconnect. And the disconnect is there for you as a technician to turn off the power to the unit and work on the unit in a safe manner. So if you don't have power to the unit and you don't have power to your disconnect, the next step would be to find the electrical room and find the breaker, the panel, the electrical panel, and isolate where the power is supposed to come from, and then see if you have a tripped breaker in the electrical panel. And usually they're very easy to find, because when you don't have power to the disconnect, then you'll probably have a trip breaker somewhere. And the trip breaker is very easy to spot because all the breakers are on, so they're in one position, they're all in one row. And then a trip breaker would be in the center of that specific breaker, so it's very easy to spot. And then for me personally, if I find a trip breaker, I never just reset it and turn the unit on. I would always go back to the unit first and go through like we went over last week, and go put your electric meter on ohms, on resistance, and just check all of your connection and make sure that you don't have a short circuit or a connection to ground that would cause the breaker to just trip again. But if you went through that and you checked all your components, all your connections, you don't have a short circuit and you don't have a ground fault, then it is probably something that's caused by an overload, which means that some component in the air conditioning system is drawing too much power, which overheats the breaker and then it trips. And that can take sometimes like a minute, 2 minutes, sometimes 5 minutes. It depends how much it's overloading, and it can happen very fast. But that is a different problem from a short circuit or a ground fault, because it's literally a component trying to pull too much power, which would overheat the wires, damage the wires, and cause fires. and the breaker is a safety device in that case, and it shuts off the power to the component. It makes sense, or
Yeah, it makes
do you have
sense.
a question
So far makes sense.
Okay, I'll just keep talking, and if you have a question, you can ask, because if you have a question, maybe somebody else has the same question, and then we can just cover it immediately. Um, so yeah, what you would do in that case, because you wouldn't find it necessarily with your meter, not necessarily, you can probably, because the two most likely causes is that on single phase systems, you have a capacitor that's bad, which I've had that recently where I came on a call. I was actually the second technician on site, and I was told that the relays were bad. Sorry, not the relays, the contactors were bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing, just differently built. But anyways, so the contactor was bad. So I came on site to replace the contactor. But when I got on site, I found that the contactor was pulled in, but the unit was not running. And that's for me always an indication that there is no power, because if the contactor is pulled in, that means that there is a connection and the equipment should be running. So for me, usually a contactor fails if it doesn't pull in, or if it causes the low voltage to trip, to break. I mean, usually you have like a fuse on there. So if your low voltage is, if you don't have low voltage, then that's when I would look for a bad contactor. Anyway, so the story is that I came on site to replace the contactor, and it was pulling in, so the equipment was supposed to run, but it wasn't running. So I went through, I found that there was no power to the unit, there was no power to the disconnect switch. And then I went into the space and I found that there was a tripped breaker in the electrical panel. Which then I went back on the roof and I went through everything. I checked for short circuits or ground faults, and I couldn't find anything. So I went back and I reset the breaker. I left the disconnect off. And then when I went on the roof, I turned the disconnect on, and then the unit wanted to start. And that was a single phase system. So you have capacitors on there. And the compressor made this really like whining, like I call it like a whining sound. It's like a grinding sound. It's trying to start. It goes like, it's trying to start and it doesn't start. And also your amperage is really high. I think it was like 90 amps, and the breaker was like a 40 amp breaker or something. So I did that. I heard that sound for a second. I turned it off immediately. And so I didn't trip the breaker again. And then I went to look for what was causing that. And sometimes it happens that the compressor gets stuck. So because it rotates, and sometimes it just seizes up. And at that point, you will have to replace the compressor. But sometimes you can install a hard start kit. That's what it's called, a hard start kit.
Mm-hmm.
It just basically provides additional power just during startup.
Mm-hmm.
It just is basically a separate capacitor that you install that has a very high amount of power that it provides. And
Uh-huh.
so I tested that capacitor, and it's supposed
Sorry,
to
you
read
froze a little bit. Froze a little bit. Can you repeat that?
what?
You froze. You
Which
froze
part?
on the capacitor.
Which part?
You said uh replace the capacitor and you froze.
Place the
Hello?
capacitor,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems like there's a bad connection. I can't hear you.
Ah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So change the capacitor and then what?
Um, I don't exactly know, so I'm just gonna repeat.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah, so there's a hard start kit, and that capacitor is basically provides additional power to start the compressor
Mm-hmm.
just on startup. Um, and then I tested that, and I it's supposed to read I think it was 200 or 250 microfarad, and it
Mm-hmm.
read 12,
Mm-hmm.
which is very, very low,
Mm-hmm.
preventing the compressor to start. So then I went and I I don't have those on the truck usually. So I bought one, I installed it, and then the compressor started immediately.
The compressor started and what? Sorry, there is bad connection.
And then it started immediately after I
Okay.
installed the capacitor.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's just something that can happen. I also had another call where it was different, where the compressor was actually electrically bad, you know.
Mhm.
But just talking about overloads, so it can be on single phase. It can be that it's a bad capacitor because it doesn't start and it's trying to draw too much amps, and then it trips the breaker. But I also had another call where I found that the belt on the blower motor
Mhm.
had broken, and it wrapped around the pulley of the motor. So the motor was trying to run, but because it has this rubber part on it, because the belt, is made out of this rubber and fibers and stuff, and so it wrapped around it, and then there was so much resistance there that the motor couldn't turn, but it was trying to turn. It caused such an overload that then the breaker tripped. So that was very obvious because I just opened the unit and I saw it there right away.
Mhm.
And I could remove the belt, replace the belt, and then the unit was running. That was all that was wrong with it. But I just wanted to go over that on a separate note, because if you have a trip breaker or a blown fuse or something, it can be that it's a short, but it can also be that it's an overload. And
Mm.
those are different things that you would have to diagnose and look for. Because if you can't, like usually I always assume that it's some kind of a short circuit or a ground fault. That's just me personally, because that's what I've experienced a lot. But also capacitors go bad. So especially on single phase, like if you're working on residential,
Mhm.
that's a lot of single phase where you have a lot of capacitors. Um, so I would tend to probably look more for overload conditions in that case.
Mm. Okay.
So yeah, that's something that I just wanted to go over in a different light, because it's the same symptom, like you don't have power to the unit and it doesn't work, but it's a different way how to diagnose and actually take care of the problem.
Okay. Makes
Yeah.
sense. And so, okay, so the capacitors, and that's what you take, and then you replace you replace whatever you find, and then it should work, right? It should be able to work. If that was the problem, the unit should be able to just run.
Yeah, if you find, like, if you diagnose the unit, if you're going through your troubleshooting process and you find the correct problem and you handle the correct problem, you replace the part, or in that, like in the one story, it was the belt that was bad, so that was very easy. You just replace the belt,
Mm-hmm.
and then when you reset the breaker and you turn the unit on, it's supposed to just run.
Mm-hmm.
And a good thing to do always is to take your meter, your amps meter, put it on amps, and then just see how much amps the unit is drawing and how
Mm-hmm.
much amps the different components are drawing,
Mm-hmm.
um, just to verify that the unit is actually running within manufacturer specifications.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's something you should do anyway all the time when you're on a service call, just to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that everything is running after you leave. You just take your voltage, your amperage, your supply air temperature, your return air temperature, your outside air temperature. You just like check all your stuff to make sure that the unit is running how it's supposed to, and not that you fix something and then you leave and then you get a call back the next day because something else was wrong or so. Usually when I go on a service call, unless it's like something super, super, super obvious that I fix one thing and I know that everything is good, I usually go through everything and just take all the different readings just to make sure there's nothing else going on that I should be taking care of, and not get a call back. And customer will appreciate it, and it also saves you time having to drive back and forth and stuff. So
That makes sense.
it's always a good idea. Yeah.
That makes sense. Well, that was good. That was good that we learned this today. And I guess that concludes today's meeting, driving to work. And then I'll make another announcement on the school community for next week. And then we'll see what happens.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah. I mean, we just keep doing them, and then maybe at some point somebody will jump on or tell us when we can when it's better time, and not like John was saying, we should do it at 3 a.m. in the morning because it's when it's the good time in New Zealand. But
Okay.
I would love to have a live call with him, but it's kind of like a time difference is so bad.
I know. It's horrible.
Anyways,
Okay.
it's okay. I mean, that's the plus and minus of like the international, like the internet like can connect anyone. Like we have people from, like all over. We have
Mm-hmm.
people from Africa, from Europe, from New Zealand, from America. It's actually pretty cool. I really like that. So.
That's good. Alrighty then.
But
Well,
yeah,
see
so
you
we have
next
the
week.
replay, so that's good.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
fair. See you next week.
Yes, see you next week. Okay, bye.
Bye.